Today, the world knows Obama will be serving a second term as president of the United States. And as the media blitz switches from constant campaign coverage to post-election analysis, we want to discuss some of the other news that came out of last night, specifically ballot measures, many of which are historic. Last night was a triumph for those that believe marijuana should be legal. Medical marijuana use passed in Massachusetts. But perhaps more significantly, recreational marijuana use passed in Colorado and Washington state. That means people can smoke it just for the fun of it. Oregon, however, wasn't ready to legalize smoking for the sake of getting high. The ballot measure did not pass there. Now on to California, where Proposition 37, which would have required the labeling of genetically modified food, failed at the voting booth. California also voted on a number of crime and punishment ballots. Proposition 34 to repeal the death penalty failed. Proposition 35 to increase criminal penalties for human trafficking passed. Proposition 36 to ease the 3 strikes law that passed. For more on these groundbreaking ballot measures and their potential impact, RT White House correspondent Christine Frizzau and Abby Martin, the host of Breaking the Set, are here to weigh in. Welcome, ladies. Nice to see you here.
Good to be with you.
So we have a lot to talk about. I guess first off, we'll talk about marijuana. It's legal in 2 states now.
Well, here's the thing, though. It's legal, but a lot of people are saying don't run out and get your Rocky Mountain High right away because the federal government has said the federal laws are still in place. And so as much as, especially those who say states should decide these things for themselves, the federal government, the DEA is still saying, well, you're still going to be breaking federal law even if you go out and light up in the streets.
That's true. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in terms of the legal ramifications.
Yeah, I mean, during Obama's lead up on the campaign trail, he said states would decide. He admitted to smoking weed recreationally when he was younger. So I was surprised coming from Oakland to see how much the DEA and federal government cracked down to raid the cannabis clubs there for medicinal purposes. So I can only imagine what's going to happen to these states who have taken it upon themselves to take that extra step. I think it's still an amazing shift of cultural progression.
And it's not just about getting high, and it's not just about using drugs. I mean, the bottom line here, and I know you've talked about this a lot on your show, is how much money it costs to incarcerate people who are, arrested for, smoking weed, selling small amounts of marijuana. It just costs the state so much money. And so voters, a lot of people, have never tried any drugs, and they voted to legalize it because they say, hey, get these people out of our prisons. We don't want to pay their rent. We don't want to pay their meals. So it's a bigger issue.
And we talk a lot about the war on drugs, the prison industrial complex, and this is all playing into that. So, I mean, do you think, Abby, that this could be a turning point in reforming the system?
Well, I think it's interesting, the 3 strikes law that did pass in California. I was really happy to see that pass because I was thinking initially, oh, great, now these people who have low quantities of marijuana who are in jail, we can stop, maybe try to reform the system, which is a great first step, but it really doesn't account, the 3rd strike doesn't account for drug or sex crimes. So that's kind of like a gray area there where it only applies where it still applies to these people. So in terms of reforming the system as a whole, I still think, as Christine mentioned, the federal government's still going to have a big problem with this. We know the lobbying from the prison industrial complex isn't going to stop anytime soon. So it'll be interesting to see what plays out. I definitely think it's a great start.
Absolutely. Want to move on now because we have a lot. There were a lot of interesting ballots that were passed last night to GMO labeling. And California said no thanks to labeling our food. We don't need to know, I guess, that our food contains GMO. Your reaction, I guess.
Really sad. As a California girl, I was really, really sad to hear that. But on the other hand, the issue was made about money. It wasn't a right to know issue. We had a $47 million disinformation campaign coming from Monsanto and other biotech ag giants saying, hey, this is going to cost families $400 a year more in food. And people are just like, hey, I don't want to pay $400 more a year in food that I'm eating. When really, I mean, the cost was really inconsequential. It would really just cost a one-time amount to these companies to change their labeling. And so when you make the argument about money and costing more to consumers, it's really hard to sort through all of this
People
disinformation.
are thinking about their bottom line. They don't want to pay more for their groceries.
Well, I think, too, a lot of people who saw these ads, I mean, I will agree that the messaging war from these big companies like Monsanto was extremely successful, because they said not only will these places have to change their labels, but they're also going to have to be worried about lawsuits. What if they actually do have an ingredient that used genetically modified? It is very surprising, though, I will say. I mean, we had the attorney for this on our show earlier in the night. She was optimistic that it was going to pass, that people would say, yes, I do want to know what I'm eating. She said that they did numerous surveys, and people thought that they had never eaten anything genetically modified, anything GMO, whereas all of us have. You know, it's so prevalent out there.
And that shows you how strong the message can be when you're influenced with so many millions of dollars, because 90% of Americans, when polled just about the issue itself, would you want it to be labeled, they say yes. So when you have 90% of the entire country agreeing, yes, we want labeling, and then a proposition like this failing, it really does show you how convoluted things can become.
I think if you have a ballot measure and you look at how much outside money from outside of the state is coming in, that should be an automatic red flag to say, wait a minute, what do all these people outside that I don't know, that I don't have anything in common with, that live across the country or in other countries, what do they have to gain from this, and why are they pouring so much money into it? I think that's an important question when you look at these ballot initiatives.
Yeah, and as Abby had mentioned, $46 million pumped into proponents or opponents of food labeling. On the other side, it was only around $9 million, so a very stark contrast there. Also interesting that it was defeated in California, but 60 countries around the world do require the labeling, but for some reason it's not.
It's such a non-issue here because of the collusion going on with the government. We see Michael Taylor, the former VP of Monsanto, in one of the top, he's a food safety czar. We see all the FDA, they've deemed GMO foods as substantially equivalent to non-GMO foods since the late 1990s. Bush Sr. put this in office, and it really has been a non-issue ever since. Other countries around the world are so much more far ahead than us. But then we saw with Vermont and other states who have passed labeling. Monsanto's threatened to sue them, and they have not been able to actually put it into effect. So this shows you the enormous power that these companies wield over our government body.
All right, I want to move on now to another ballot that was passed, basically a huge victory for proponents of gay marriage. Marriage equality wins in the state. If we can bring them up there, the states of Maine, Maryland, and Washington. They all said, "I do" to marriage equality. The ban on same-sex marriage, it failed in Minnesota, which is also a victory, not as straightforward, I guess, but as we can see, a huge night for proponents of gay marriage. What do you think, Chrissy?
I think this is huge. I was in California 4 years ago when Proposition 8 was up. A lot of people were confused by it. They didn't understand it. Voters in California overwhelmingly voted in the first black president. They also voted in favor of banning gay marriage. But gay marriage at that point had already been legalized by the courts. I think it's huge that voters are now approving this. I think it's huge that voters have turned down, because let's remember, gay marriage is banned, or marriage rather, defined as only between a man and a woman, I think in 30 plus states now. But I am optimistic. I think that this is, we're seeing a huge shift. I think in 2016, sorry to already be talking about that, the day after election, but I really think in the years moving ahead, even conservative people, even especially moderately conservative people, are going to say, you know what? This is a non-issue. Right. Everyone knows someone, is related to someone who's gay. Let's leave gay marriage alone. It really doesn't affect us. It really doesn't affect my children if their friends have two mommies or two daddies. I think this is a huge turning point, but I think that you're going to be surprised how quickly it becomes a non-issue.
Yeah, we've seen with polls that young, I think it's like between the ages of 18 and 30, it's so inconsequential to people who've been polled, and they're like, we don't care about this issue. Conservatives and liberals alike, I mean, they see it as completely something that we should not even be discussing. They just all kind of agree that, you know, gay marriage should be a human right. It should be
the biggest thing that happened, I think, with that being on the ballot is that the NAACP took a position on this. So you have, the foremost organization on civil rights in this country come out and not only take a position, but take it in favor of gay marriage and say this is a civil rights issue too, really turning the, tide of, what a lot of, African Americans have traditionally been taught in their churches. And so I think that was really significant,
I don't understand why why civil libertarians can't see gay rights as the new civil rights of our generation. Women's suffrage, civil rights movement, and now gay rights. So it's really just this giant roadblock in our history that we can't seem to overturn. But I think we are slowly. And in California, when Prop 8 was upheld, I think a lot of people were confused by the
language.
I remember, it was very purposeful how confusing the measure was, and a lot of people that I know thought that they were actually trying to protect the rights of gay people to get married, and actually they were voting the opposite.
All right, a lot of really historical and groundbreaking ballots that were voted on last night, and appreciate you both for coming in to talk about that. That was RT White House correspondent Christine Frizzell and Abby Martin, host of Breaking the Set.
Thanks, Liz.